I'd seen a little documentary about the life of Tolstoy, and I had to jump over a couple of pieces where I thought, I don't want to know the story and ending of these books. I want to read them. Right. I don't want to get this in this documentary. But one thing that apparently Tolstoy believed in is that novels, they are not for entertainment, but they are the best vehicle to teach us about life and other people and help us understand how even the most foreign persons to us, what their internal world looks like, why they do, what their inner struggles are, and hence help us understand each other better and therefore make us less strangers. So something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing.
Which makes perfect sense.
When you read, when
right?
you read Anna Karenina and you hear this little bit, you go, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Because he does in incredible detail and in human beauty share a light of the inner worlds of people that are so often so drastically different from the outer worlds or outer appearances.
Yeah. And there's like these characters in there too. It's like when I read it, I'm like very judgmental toward these people, and then I read further and I'm like, that's why. I see. Yeah, they actually, I get it. Okay.
And then there's moments like one character that I have loved is Stepan Arkadyevich in Anna Karenina, because he's such a carefree, happy-go-lucky, I will just arrange my life in ways that give me pleasure. And no matter how much you want to point me to all the things I do wrong, I look at them and I honestly just shoulder shrug and go, life, who's perfect? What's perfect? Let's just have a good time. It's just, he is so, he seems so unburdened by a conscience or morality or what other people would think. He's in such good spirits, and just in some ways he reminds me of Zorba the Greek, because he's just attacking life, with open arms, just wants all of it. He just wants to live as much life as humanly possible. He's a very lively character, very alive human. In other ways, because he's not the highlight of the book, you don't get the depth that Zorba has, right? And kind of seeing a man that has fought many wars, that has seen so much life and death and murder and tragedy and comedy and everything. Like Zorba is encompassing all of humanity, both the comedy and the tragedy of it. And therefore, he loves life so much because he's lived so much life. You don't get that with Stepan Arkadyevich, where he seems to have been placed in a lucky position in society. Had a lucky lottery ticket in life.
Just smooth
sailing, but he is aware of it, and he is unwilling to make his life harder than he has to. Like, there's other people that are just as lucky maybe, but their internal conflicts make their life a bit tougher, right? Their doubts, their fears, their this, their that. And he sees all that. He's aware of all of it, and he goes, why should I punish myself or burden myself in ways I don't have to? Life is whatever it is. I'm in this lucky seat. I'm going to enjoy the fuck out of it. I'm not going to apologize for any of it. So even a character like that is presented in, it's kind of that is an archetype, right? The charming, what would we call it? The charming bad guy. It's not even a bad guy. It's like the charming selfish person, right? In movies, in so many stories, we see a character that's a bit too selfish, that is not really acting, that is acting in ways that if they acted in those ways towards us in real life, we would be hating that person or be really upset at them. But because it's in this story removed from us, and because they do it with a smile and a wink, and there's something charming about it. There's something enchanting about it. Maybe it's the fantasy that maybe I could, maybe it's the pleasure we get from imagining, maybe it's me, but that's a character that's been in so many movies and so many stories that it must be a universal thing, where we imagine or we live vicariously through them in the story, right? We're imagining how great it must feel to be that person, right? And to just wink through life and just do the things that you like. And there's a hedonistic pleasure in being selfish in ways that is hard to enjoy when you have morale, right? When you have a conscience. It's really hard to fully enjoy being completely selfish. But then seeing it in a character that has charm, right? That has wit, that winks at us as an audience and says, I know what you think of me and I see it too, but whatever, life is life. Like when somebody has the self-awareness and the humor and the hubris to be that way, there's something that we love in those characters, although in real life we know we would hate them, right? Maybe similarly as the hero that goes and kills every single person that had anything to do with the wrong that happened to him. And like in real life, we wouldn't want anybody that thinks something bad happened to them to take a machine gun and just kill, hundreds of people along the way to justice. But in a movie, there's a satisfaction in that revenge, that kind of, unstopped, violent revenge, right? There's something that there's a pleasure in living vicariously through that, because we won't ever do it in real life. And we wouldn't find pleasure seeing it in real life, necessarily. So Stepan Arkadyevich is that kind of a character. And throughout the entire book, as he appears, I would always get special pleasure from his selfishness,
Yeah. I loved that scene in the where he talks with Levin, just in the situation where early on in the book, they're like Levin and Vronsky. They both are kind of like haven't put their cards on the table yet, but both are interested in Kitty, right? And then he meets with Levin, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, let's catch up." And yeah, I know what's on your mind and in your heart. Come on, let's talk about, right? And then he talks about him, and he tells him, and he advises him, and he encourages him to talk with Kitty, right? And gives her like advice how to do it right, how to propose, and all of that, right? And then. And it's so heartfelt. He really wants, and he tells her, I believe you are the right for her, right? And then like the same, I don't know, the next day or something like this, he meets with Vronsky, and he has the same conversation. You're the right guy for her. You should do this, you should do that. But it's in both cases, in that moment, it's like heartfelt. Yes. He's just like, this is a good man. She is a beautiful woman. They should be together, right? But he doesn't connect it.
that he has written that character so great, because typically you would judge him for it, but because Tolstoy writes him in a way where in that moment, he felt it when he was telling it to Levin, but as he's now seeing Vronsky, who's also a good man and has good qualities and he really likes, he's like, exactly. In that moment, he loves Vronsky and wants to help him, And so he's able to love both of these men that in this situation were, competitors without any internal doubt or conflict, because it's just in the moment, he's jolly-go-lucky and he loves people in life, and he just in that moment thinks, you are a great guy, here's what I would do if I were you together, and he tells him what he told even I think Levin, and how to this is what Levin is going to do, and this is how you should play it. And it's such a fine difference between somebody that plays people, right, to make them like him, or the way that Stepan Arkadyevich is written as a character. He gives those people advice heartfelt, right? He in that moment, he loves them, and he's so free of what did I do yesterday, and is this good, and should I do this, and should I do that? He's just in the moment, feels right and feels good. Let me help this friend, And so the motivation why makes such a big difference. Reading Tolstoy, I don't know why that question came up. Oh, I know why. Yesterday, as I was reading, I'm now, I think 80% through the book, so I'm in the final inning of the book. And yesterday, I was thinking about the character of Levin, right? Where Levin, the way he writes him throughout the book, is one of the best humans in the story in terms of just what we would, how we would judge somebody on ethics and character. Like, who here tries his hardest to be a good person? Levin would be probably number one. Not always in succeeding, but in trying to be a good person, right? He seems to be trying the most. And then I was thinking, but also Levin is, if you asked, who is one of the most tormented characters throughout the entire book. Now, maybe at the end, Anna and Vronsky are going to be more tormented than anybody else, but throughout the entire book, most tormented person, for sure, Levin. From the first page to the last, he's always in some kind of an inner conflict, doubt, something stresses him, he's not sure, there's always something going on. And I
love that scene also where he comes back to his estate in the countryside, right? After the thing with Kitty didn't work out and everything, and he saw his brother who's like in this destitute situation, and then he's going back and he said, oh, I shall change myself. I will work harder and live more humble, and I will not be carried away by some wild passion. And, and then he's arriving in his home, and there's like all the things that he, has to take care of. And he's already realizing like, it's not going to be that easy to do all this change. And then he's already slowly morphing into falling back into the old patterns, but also blaming himself for it. And
He is like the prototypical tormented human, And then many times throughout the story, he changes his mind, right? Or he goes like one direction. Oh, I'm going to do this now. And then he finds some pleasure and elation in, now I have found the answer, the simple, this is going to be my path. There's relief, unburdening. This is going to be my path. And then something happens, he's like, goes off the path, and he realizes, no, that was not my path. And he's again like, which path should I take? Is it this? Is it? And then he finds another thing and goes, okay, now I got it. This is my path. I'm happy now. This is good. And then he goes off track again. There's such depth to that character. But yesterday I was thinking at one point, it's interesting how much intent and I don't know if I would say inner struggle, but so here's the thought that I had yesterday. If you took two people, and one of them or both of them did the exact same amount of bad deeds, right? Let's say both of them were robbing banks and they were doing it in the exact same way. And you wrote that one of them was completely at peace at being a robber and stealing from people and making little children afraid when they see him with a gun and all that. He was just not caring about anybody and was just purely selfish. And you made the other character in internal conflict, always wanting to stop robbing banks, feeling terrible when he saw the child being afraid of him, just always in doubt, and then at moments thinking, no, I have to rob banks, and then doing it for maybe good reasons because he wants to help his mother who's sick, or there's this all these conflict, there's all this quote unquote goodness or ethics inside of him. But if you just looked at their actions, it would be indistinguishable. They all just woke up in the morning, would go grab that gun, rob a bank, leave, and do whatever with the money. If the actions were exactly the same, but one person had internal turmoil, we would all say the person with the internal turmoil is the better human. Right?
Yeah.
We would say this person is better in some ethical, religious, whatever, spiritual way. This is if I had to choose who is a better person, that person. And I was thinking, why is that? Right? Because on the one hand, just purely on actions, maybe, one could make the argument the person that didn't know better, that did not have the inner voice or the ethics to stop or slow them down, is a better person. Because that person was acting in accordance with their thoughts. And the person that knew better and was struggling and in conflict was constantly losing the inner battle and going over to the bad side or doing these terrible things, although they knew better. But I think when we know that someone has inner conflict that is driving him or her to try to become better, that points to a possible redemption, right? A possible turnaround, a possible transformation. This person might become a better person, or at least this person is being punished internally as they're acting in these wrong ways. They're not having evil satisfaction of being internally at peace and in harmony with their selfishness. But it's interesting, right? Because this is purely, these are philosophical, emotional ways of judging, right? It's not rational, because an action is an action is an action, right? But
and at the same time, like, I think why we would judge the conflicted person as being like a better character, right? The other one would probably be more popular, right? Because there's less conflict, so it's more enjoyable to follow and be around that person.
Yeah, clarity is so incredibly attractive. That's why con men are so good. It still blows my mind that con men didn't mean convict men, but meant confidence men. But con men are so attractive and successful because they have confidence, which is something everybody's lacking. Nobody enjoys being around people that are overly conflicted within themselves, right? We might love these people, but it's not enjoyable being around them, and we don't want to be them.
Yeah.
But when you meet somebody that seems to have it all, that seems to know it all, that seems to be at inner peace and have found knowledge that they completely are confident in, we're like, how the fuck did this person get there? I want some of that. I want some of that confidence, clarity, and calm. So yeah, it's also,
and then
go ahead.
On the other end of the spectrum, I feel like what you mentioned is like the most inner conflicted person, at least until where I have read so far. I'm just like at the beginning of part 2. Is to me the brother of Levin, what's his name? Nikolai Levin?
Yeah.
Where he is so like against the capitalist and the ruling class, and he wants to help the poor and suppressed people, right? But then there's like someone serving him food, and he's shouting angrily at that guy, and he's eating his food, drinking his wine, greedy, like he has more greed in like this little thing than like a capitalist in exploiting the working class, right? And he doesn't even see that consciously, but there's so much conflict just in that short chapter where he describes this, where it's like, oh my God, this is both painful and delicious to observe.
Yeah, that is also an interesting character, Levin's brother.
Yeah, and so repelling, right? Like you can sense like, oh, I don't want to stay in this room with this guy anymore, right?
Through the eyes of Levin later in the story, you can sense that his brother was an incredibly sweet boy, and maybe, like at one point, Levin says he was not, he was not made for this world or something along those lines. And you can tell this is sometimes the type of person that might have been too sensitive for life. And, when you are too sensitive for life, you can turn one way or the other. Either you get overly aggressive, right? And just everything is a fight. Because everything is a threat. When you are so hypersensitive, you either fight everything and everybody's evil, or you retreat from everything and go completely numb. Don't see, don't feel, don't care. And his brother went to this hyper aroused, fighting everything. Everybody's evil. Everything is, he's wronged. Everything that happens in the world is a personal wrong towards him. So he's so tormented and angry.
And he even says it like, he recalls like, I can see why these other people in my circle think so lowly of him, right? Because they see him drunken and angry, shouting in this, dirty clothes. And then, but I know my brother's pure soul, right? I understand him deep. Right? And it's like, you see like how different the outer and inner world of him is.
And later in the book, I don't want to spoil it for you, but
please don't.
To me, the most touching moment in that entire book is a interaction between Levin and his brother much later in the book. And it's incredible. And the way that Tolstoy writes it is so incredibly powerful and also rings so true. Like in a lot of moments in the book, but this was one that stood out to me particularly. I have seen, this is not a big secret, like his brother becomes ill, right? That's not a big spoiler. I have seen people in my family, my grandmother and my grandfather, I had a bunch of people die and get sick in my family, but I had 2 people that were really, really sick and old, and were living with us for their final years as their health was deteriorating more and more. And so I've seen people when they're terminally ill and they live with you, they sleep with you, they become little babies again, and how you have to take care and how they react and how they are. And was reading that part of the story. It was written so truthfully in terms of like me recognizing what I had experienced that I thought, all right, Tolstoy must have lived through this, right? To be able to write this so well, you can't just certain things you cannot just imagine. You have to have lived to be able to tell a story like this accurately. And in many places in the book, this is why I think this is one of my fascinations with people that are incredible writers, is that when by writing these characters with such truthful, alive power, when they're able to really bring these characters to life fully and full dimensionally in these situations, it makes me think these writers understood life at a much deeper level than most other people, because you cannot write this well without understanding the person this well. And now it's one thing to understand one kind of person or yourself really well. It's another thing if you can write an epic story that involves so many different characters, that involves so many different things, from people arguing politics over war, over conflict, infidelity, sexual tension, childbirth, the pain of a mother. Like being able to come alive and write like a mother who's felt the pain of losing children, or write like all these people, you have to have understood life at a much deeper, much more meaningful level than most others, right? And it's one thing to sit there and talk about and say, this is the problem of women, and this is the problem of men, and this is how life works, to philosophize in some like theoretical way. It's another to write thousands and thousands of words that bring all of human life to create a whole fucking lifetime that is as real as if these people have lived.
And then 100 years later, people in a completely different cultural context read this and are like,
oh my God,
yeah. I know. You know who this reminds me of? And I've been there. It's amazing. Yeah.
To me, these writers stand way above the philosophers of their time, right? Or whoever, in terms of just purely who has dug the deepest in the soil of life, the human soul, right? Who has gone the deepest in digging to try to understand the human soul and what human life is all about. The people that were able to write stories that hundreds and hundreds of years later touch people all around the world, because there's so much truth in it, and there's truth in it in such depth and breadth that you recognize it. And we talked about this before, where you read something that you felt 100 times before, and you've never had anyone, including yourself, being able to express it so closely to the true experience. Use words in such magical formula that you're like, wow, this is hitting the feeling and experience exactly to the tone. And everything, I didn't know this, but everything before then, when I was trying to explain or heard stories about a similar situation, was all much further away from how that situation felt, right? Or it makes you realize a truth that you never thought about, but then like dominoes falling, you realize, wow, I felt this 1,000 times in my life, but I was never present for it. I never realized that I've gone through this emotion myself. That's so powerful. I love that so much about the great writers, and that's part of why I love reading Tolstoy. What I wanted to say originally was, even with Stepan Arkadyevich, right, who's like such a jolly, it's a way more one-dimensional character, comparing him to a bunch of others in the book, but even him, that I loved to love in the book, right, that I'd love to love for all his flaws in the book. There's one moment much later in the book where for the first time, not for the first time, but for maybe in a more rare occasion, Tolstoy goes into a lot more detail of Dolly's, who is Stepan Arkadyev's wife, her thinking through her life situation, further into the book. And for the first time, as I was reading her, right, like how she sees life, the struggles, the pain, the this, the that, and the kind of spot that Stepan Arkadyevich has put her in, as I was reading that, and it was contrasting even much harder with somebody else's relationship, where the person was treating his wife completely differently. It was the first time that as I was reading those pages, I was losing the joy for how much I love Stepan Arkadyevich. It was like, but then, you keep reading and it comes up again. You're like, whatever. Right. But that I enjoyed. I loved that, although I've been, vicariously loving this, not perfect human throughout the book, I'm reading this thing about his wife now and I go, he is a piece of shit, he is truly a piece of shit. And then, you keep on reading, you're like, but he's such a nice guy and he doesn't know any better. You don't care anymore. That is another thing that I think for a long time now I've started to admire. And I've only come aware of this as I've started reading the great literature and the kind of great novels, that I love people and I admire writers who are able to write multidimensional characters, right? This is something I've always loved in people. I think it took me a while to realize it and say, I like people that are multidimensional, that are not one-dimensional. I like people that are conflicting in some ways. Like I like somebody that is a hyper-capitalist but is also, somebody that is super sensitive and a sweetheart and artistic and listens to music and has to cry. Like somebody that's like a hardest in one area and super softy in another area, and somebody that's not as easy to figure out. Like to me, those people are richer in terms of the amount of life they represent and how they enrich life for all of us. But I never realized how much I admired being able to storytell this way. And I think it's because that is writing a story where this is the bad guy and the bad guy is bad, right, and this is the good guy, like a Marvel Marvel comic, right? Or at least Marvel movies. I don't know about the comics. I haven't read the comics. But Marvel movies are the most one-dimensional bullshit ever. Always the good guys are really, really good and the bad guys are really, really bad. The end, right? More or less. Now, of course, there's exceptions to this, but if you, especially the big blockbuster movies where the hero is just such a sweet guy, like a Captain America movie, right? Captain America is so annoyingly good as a character. There's no edge to him. There's nothing. There's no at least like a Spider-Man. It's funny because he's a teenager and he has some internal conflict about being a superhero and the people he puts in danger and all that. When there's no conflict within the hero and when there's no conflict within the villain, it's just so false that I can't be sucked into this. I cannot lose myself in the story. I at all times am aware I'm watching a bullshit movie, right? And so I cannot enjoy it. And the more multifaceted somebody is able to write people, the more alive they become, because I honestly believe that this is life. Like nobody is just bad or good. Right? Fucking Hitler was great to his dogs. I was telling this to a friend that's like a dog lover, and she couldn't believe it. She loves dogs so much, and she's so indoctrinated in the belief that if you love animals, you must be a good person, that she was like, no, this is not. Really?
I love that.
And in her mind, she was trying to make this thing about like, what kind of dogs? Because she wanted to think of like
probably only the purebred German.
Yeah, and also maybe the aggressive dogs. Like did they breed really aggressive, strong dog? Maybe that would go with a Hitler. And it's like, and he was like super sweet. He loved animals so much he didn't eat meat. Like he was a vegetarian, and he was a painter and an artist.
And he loved to draw. Yeah. Amazing.
So, and he loved nature. Like, he loved many things that really nice people love, and would think that if somebody loves nature and cares about nature, loves animals and cares about animals, and loves art, music, painting, how could that person be a bad person? Right? And so, to his dogs, Hitler was probably an amazingly nice energy and human or whatever, right? To not just to his dogs, like all of us, as we live, to somebody we're a tyrant, to somebody we're a savior, right? We're not one thing to everybody, and to ourselves as well. If we're just honest with how many inner battles and fights we have, well, who's battling and fighting if we're just one thing? If we're just like on one side of the table, where's the conflict coming from? It's because we're not one thing. And at different times, different parts of us take over and act. And also, it's not just us, it's other people as well. You could be or have perfectly nice intentions, and somebody that is in a situation like Levin's brother, who's so oversensitive and has been, in his growing up, has felt so much attack and danger that he's gotten so angry with life that everything and everybody is at fault and attacking him and bad and evil. You meet a person like that, no matter what you do, they will find a way to mistrust you, or to attach evil intentions behind your actions. And in their eyes, you're going to be a bad person. There's nothing you can do. It doesn't really matter in some universal sense that what they interpret is quote-unquote wrong from your perspective. In their reality, you're an evil person, right? And so when you can write people in this book, like in Anna Karenina, there's ebbs and flows of how much you. This is another thing I love. The more you get to know people, the more it ebbs and flows on how much you like or dislike them, or how you feel towards them. Like, you start liking one person, and then you really dislike them, and then you kind of have real empathy and love for them, and then you're really like angry at them. It ebbs and flows as they make different decisions that leads them down different paths. It never stays the same. You never feel one singular thing about somebody, right? And even, I'll tell you, like with a character like Levin, one interesting thing is, those characters are all so rich and multifaceted that I'm sure that, I know for a fact that people will love and hate drastically different things about them.
Different, yeah.
Right? So I'm telling you, you and I, we'd be like laughing at Stepan Arkadyevich and thinking, what a dope dude who doesn't care. Many husbands would vicariously, like him in the book, because I wish I was that much of an asshole, just enjoying myself. But I'm pretty sure that most, wives reading that book would from the get-go really dislike Stepan Arkadyevich and finding very little charm in him, But, and also the reason why you like and dislike might change over time. Like Levin, I could easily see one thing that a certain type of person would really like in him is how serious he was about his work, right? How much he cared about farming and how much he cared about having his affairs in order. He's one of the more competent people in the book, right? There's all these like higher society bullshit that is going on where they're having meetings where they talk about nothing and they politic and they chit-chat. And to him, all this is so fucking soul-crushing. He's like, I don't know what these people want. I don't care about any of this. The theatrics of this, I just want to do real things, right? I care about real things. And so I could see a lot of, a certain type of person really admiring that and liking and, connecting with that part. And then later in the book, when something really nice happens to his life, he really lets all of that go, for a while at least. And he doesn't care and he lets everything slide. And I could see, I didn't really care about that part. But as I was reading it, I thought if somebody really loved that competence part of him at the beginning, he might really hate him, right? Or judge him harshly for letting these things slide at this point of the book. I just fucking love when you have a book like this with such depth and breadth that you could read this book 100 times and get completely different experiences from it. And 100 people could read this, and if they sat there to talk about it, there would be very different nuggets and tidbits and moments that move them because it's so alive. It is like life itself, where if we all went through a tragic or a incredibly positive or moving experience, there'd be many, many different stories, many different types of memories of what happened. That to me is such powerful art, right? Where art is reflecting life better back to us than anything else that we could think of. It's really, really amazing.
I almost wonder if somebody would like Vronsky, because I feel like the kind of person that would like Vronsky is the kind of person that wouldn't read a book like that. See me judging.
Yeah. I mean, Vronsky, I'm not surprised that you don't like him. Right? That's not surprising at all. Yeah, that's interesting, especially in the beginning of the book. I mean, he also, I'll say over time in the book, I liked him more. In the beginning, he's just such a empty vessel, right? He's just so empty. Like the prince, I don't know if you heard that part, but the father of Kitty is most accurately just he's not saying in those words.
I love
but he basically says, they're all just bimbos. They're just stupid fucking pretty boys that are rich and know nothing and have zero character. They're all just fucking the same idiot.
I also love the interplay between Kitty's father and mother.
Yes.
It's so delicious.
Yeah, because it's so true. It reflects back so much true life. In that sense, actually, maybe this is one of the few situations, maybe there are many, and I'm not aware of it, but this is one dynamic where Tolstoy is actually more one-dimensional. He writes the father very lovingly and tenderly, and the mother really kind of superficially shallow, unlikable. Now, I have met... and I know I have an aunt and uncle that come to mind immediately. I've known many older couples that, from external observation, could be like, yeah, that's exactly who they were. The father is actually right about a lot of these things, but he's just lets himself be pushed to the side and is just resentful, mumbling. And the mother is like the aggressive manager of life and creating all this drama because she's doing things for the wrong reasons. It's kind of the annoying mother and the, kind but soft father, right? That kind of a dynamic is something I recognize in real life, but he never bothers to write from an internal point of view from the mother, from Kitty's mother's side, to understand her a little bit better, like the fears she has, the motivations, to make her a bit more kind or at least understandable. And he never condemns the father for being, which is the number one sin of this kind of father. And I've done this myself as a husband and father, where because you're not winning the battles, you just stop caring and you're just complaining then. Well, and I see this, another father that comes to mind immediately, that's always in this, in the corner, the entire family decides something really stupid. It's obvious this is going to be a bad idea. And then the father's like, I think this is stupid. We shouldn't do this because X, Y, Z reason. And then they're all still wanting to do it. And then they do it. And then the problem comes up that the father had foreseen. Then everybody goes, oh my God, this problem. And the father's like, well, I told you. But he's always in the corner talking to himself because he is given up, right? He's given up. That he never puts on trial. He never hints at the fault of the father for knowing better, but having basically surrendered the driving wheel to the mother.
It's made me actually, when I read about Kitty's father, it made me wonder, I wonder how Tolstoy's marriage was like. And I know he had a lot of kids, right? And say, maybe there's a deep recognition and also a little bit of, I don't know, blindness on the side of seeing it from the other side.
In this, you can definitely sense a kindness towards the father of Kitty and not so much kindness towards the mother. Now, he could have written her worse. He didn't, right? Even the most one-dimensional, or one of the more one-dimensional characters in the book, the mother of Kitty, he has not made her a caricature, because you could easily write her even more evil or more annoying. Not evil, more annoying, right? This is what you would get in TV shows or in some movies, where it's the stepmother or the annoying grandmother or something, where it's a bit more of a caricature. He didn't push it that far. He didn't, right? It's still subtle. But with her, he's just she's kind of a petty, slightly superficial, not that wise mother.
Yeah.
And the father.
And how she I love the scene where she like calls this doctor
Oh,
when
yeah.
Kitty is in despair, and then the result is like nobody understands what the doctor says, but they have to go on a trip.
Yes, it's like the father the entire time is like, what? Kitty is upset and is not eating and not looking well because she is heartbroken, and we're bringing in a doctor, and it's like a pompous con artist that that just babbles on, doesn't say anything, but is very important in his proclamation of what she may or may not have. And the mother is just like, oh my God, thankfully there's this really famous doctor that will now like fix the situation. And now we're going to go on this fucking trip that we would have gone anyways. Right?
Yeah.
All this is a big theater to appease the mother. Kitty knows it's bullshit. Yeah. She knows I'm just heartbroken. Yeah. The father's like, she's just heartbroken. But the mother needs a doctor so that her fears are calmed. Yeah. But see, so that's not an uncommon situation. But he lacks the empathy for that mother to write about how terrifying her fear is for what if there's something wrong with my daughter. Which is a debilitating fear to mothers that fathers never quite fully can get to, right? We're always worried about our children, but we're not as scared and afraid as their mothers usually are. And so with the smallest thing, the father's like, it's going to be all right. And the mother is instantly like online researching, calling friends. What is this? Is there something wrong with my child? And from a father's perspective, I can easily see how I would just want to judge this as like irrationality, right? And just being dumb or wrong. But if you have more empathy, I think you could write something that would make you understand where that terror and fear comes from the mother. Even if it's irrational, she cannot control it. Why can't she control it? Maybe there's something deeply moving there, but Tolstoy doesn't bother to go there probably because that's one thing that he doesn't care for. Who knows, right? Maybe it's hard to attach intentions to somebody like that. But it's one of those few characters where it's just, it's a dynamic between a man and a woman where for the reader, I think it's very clear who's in the right and who's in the wrong and who should be liked and who should be somebody that is annoying you a little bit. At least for a father reader, I'd be curious to see if there are people that would read those characters totally differently. But yeah, that whole charade with the doctor is funny. And I recognized myself in Kitty's father. And I recognize other older fathers that I've seen, and I've seen this pattern so many times. And then I thought, I also fell into this pattern in some areas of life. And then I thought, well, it's easy to blame the other side, so to speak, versus to go, these fathers, including myself, did not know how to act in those let's call them battles, and so just threw down their sword and gave up. Right? Just like little children threw down their toys and went to the corner and went like, well, you play whatever you guys want, I don't care.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's like that part that you also mentioned in our first conversation where it's like he made a timid attempt to extinguish the fire, but it didn't work, and then he was kind of like, okay, whatever.
Then he goes angry at the fire, and he's like, well, you burned down, fucking fire. It's your fault. Right? Yeah. Next time you're gonna come and want to talk to me, I'm not gonna want to talk to you. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a childish response that is very masculine and manly, where I could not get control over this with competence. Right? I could not know how to this situation for people to listen to me, and so I'll just throw down all the toys and go to the corner and be like, well, then I don't care anymore. And that's a very typical pattern I see so many times with fathers, older fathers, when it comes to the raising of their children, right? When you look at least in my family circles, a lot of parents, the fathers in their 50s and 60s, they'd be in this, well, I've told you and the children this a million times, but nobody's listening to me. And so I don't care anymore. Right? I'll just, whatever your mother says, you guys do, you're going to do what you guys want to do anyway. And you guys is like the mother and the children, you know? And it's such a childish attitude. And it's also very much I give up, right? I've cared and tried in the beginning, and because it didn't instantly work the way I thought it should work, I just give up. Which points me to the other thing that I
But then I still am able to later say after the thing that I
told you so.
Was warning you of, right? Yeah, I told you so. That's
I'll keep that. I'll be in the right, and all you stay in the wrong. This is also one of the quotes that I read in the last conversation we had about the book, was where Anna's husband, Alexei Alexandrovich, where it says, whatever, I'm paraphrasing, all the competence and all the, meticulousness with which he was, and all the like business-like and statesman affair-like approach that he was having so much success with in his career, he could not understand how that same approach was insane. Taking the same approach with his wife was so insane, right? Like, this is such a typical, like, the man, or the husband in this case, who had excelled in politics and in business by being a certain rational way, was trying the exact same way and applying to all the problems of his marriage, and was confused why that was totally insane, right? And not working at all. It's not producing the results he was expecting at all.
Yeah. And even Anna, when she's like, she comes back and she's in this like conflicted bubble of love, right? Where she's now like, she already loves Vronsky, but she doesn't really admit it. And then she's like going back and forth about it internally. And she's like talking to herself, this is just a silly thing that happens to women in social circles. But then also she feels like this is the only thing that matters, right? And then her husband picks up at the train station in the midst of a busy day, tries to show her some warmth, even though he has a meeting that he has to attend, and then he's talking to her, and then she's like listening to the footsteps of Vronsky walking away, not listening to us, and it's like so heartbreaking. And you can feel like, and she's the first thing when she sees her husband, it's like, why are his ears so big? Oh my God. And she sees all these flaws suddenly, right? And then later she even sees the sun.
Yes.
And even with the sun, oh my God.
That was so powerful. When he sees her son, and even her son is not as lovely as he remembered, as she remembered him. Yeah, that shit. You see, this is what...
so tough, because you can see, like, in her heart, that's really how she feels, right? But on the other, from both sides, you see, oh my God, this is so painful.
Yeah, you see in the moment of falling in love how that emotion is shading things. And like, for all intents and purposes, she was like such a loving mother to her son. And it was where she attached all her love because she was not really in love with her husband. And then she falls in love with another man. And for a moment, it's like she's turned into a little girl, and she just can't quite love and care for even her son anymore the same way, right? At least in those moments. Yeah. And this is completely internal, right? Nobody knows or sees anything at that point yet. And this is something that I loved about the I can never say his name correctly, but the Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club, right? When I saw his interview with Joe Rogan, where he would describe these, like, finding these moments where we as humans have despicable thoughts or emotions that we would never speak out, and it's maybe just a moment and it leaves, and like finding the humanity in those moments and like writing them out or telling these stories or shining a light on that, where it was talking about his mother, who was sick for a long time and he loved really dearly and had a very close relationship with, and then hearing the news that his mother had died. And this mix of emotion, where on the one hand he was, in pain, but on the other he was relieved. And it was not a relief because he was thinking, oh, finally.
Yeah, it was a selfish
Yeah, it
relief.
was not, oh, finally she's happy. It was a relief of, finally I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to go there and visit her and see her in this space. Like, I am freed of the burden of having to worry and care for my sick old mother. Right?
Yeah. This was also in Kafka, right? In Metamorphosis. Like, so painful and stretched out. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, where people,
but also so true.
With the family, that was, again, like in Kafka's Metamorphosis, again, nobody is necessarily a bad person in that. Now, I could see people reading that book and hating the family. I could see them hating the sister, right? Some people I could see hating him, right, for being such a coward the entire time, basically. But at no time is there clearly somebody at fault or wrong. But the beautiful thing is this: when you have to care for somebody over a period of time, it becomes a burden. And then inevitably, no matter how much you love that person, no matter how good of a person you are, at some point you'll turn to some dark thoughts and feelings towards that person, right? Yeah. That is truly what it means to be human. But many of these feelings and emotions, because we find them so despicable, we never would speak out.
Yeah, and they don't fit the social narrative, right? It's,
you, and I think even more so than people realizing that they feel this way and not saying it, I think oftentimes these moments, these thoughts are thoughts that are either so quickly suppressed or so strongly, hidden from your own consciousness that people don't even, like a day later, wouldn't even be able to say, I had a bit of relief in that moment. Because that feeling felt weird, and so the thought ran to something else, right? Like, whatever, opened the television, ate some chocolate, talked to somebody else. Like, we run away from these thoughts and feelings, and then we ourselves are not pregnant with them and going, I don't know where to deliver this thought because people would judge me. I think there's some of that, but more so, this is the 20%, 80% of these more darker thoughts, more shadow sides of us. I think we're not courageous enough to look in the eye to even know they existed or they're present in us in the moment. And then when somebody would want to talk to us about how did it feel when, your mother died or whatever, we would think we are speaking honestly when we told them about all our pain and all our suffering, and we would never dare to think about saying anything else because in our memory we've already decided to forget that. We don't know that anymore. I think that's the kind of...
It's still there, but it requires some digging to get to, and even the digging itself is such an unpleasant task that it's like, why even... You don't do it unless you have some specific motivation.
But it's at that level where we're with a shovel and we look at the other person and we look over at that corner of the field or whatever where the skeleton is buried, and we don't think, oh, I need to throw away the shovel and he doesn't need to know about the skeleton that I have. We're not at that level. It's we talk to them about the weather, we look at the shovel, once in a while we glance at that spot, but we never think anything. We just glance at the shovel and at the spot, and then we talk about things, and then we go back to the house and we put away the shovel, and the next day in our memory there was never a shovel or a spot that we were looking at. It's just still just a slight layer. Now, all it takes is the right level of courage to wake up and see the shovel in our hands and go, why do I have a shovel? Oh, shit, what's that spot over there? Fuck, I think there's something dark. Do I have the courage to uncover this in front of my friend and myself? But that, like bringing that up from the lower levels of consciousness or awareness, that thing requires a level of courage that most of the time we don't have. So our cowardice are keeping our thoughts, basically, or keeping those realizations just a level below our eyesight.
Clean and cool.
Yeah, just pushing them down just below our eyesight. So we look and we're like, I have a weird feeling, but I don't see it. Right? It's like sometimes I've had this experience many times where, my mother would have, new shoes or new earrings or something, and my eyes would go there a number of times, would look at this thing that's new, but my mind wouldn't think, are these new earrings? And then a couple of hours later, my mother would be like, I just bought new earrings. And I'd go, damn it, I was keep looking at your earrings, so I noticed it. But it was not yet at a level where it penetrated my thoughts to go, are these new earrings? Should I ask? Should I say something? It's that sort of a thing where it's there, you see it, but not yet. It is not a fully formed, aware thought. Hey, there's a skeleton there. There's a conflicting thought, an emotion that I don't want to feel. And so we're just like, look at people, look at our shovels, and we just don't connect the dots. But it's beautiful when anytime we're able to notice and recognize our shadow side and then use the shovel to bring it up from the ground and deal with it and have empathy and humanity towards it, not judge ourselves, not use it as punishment, not use it for guilt or shame, but just look at it and understand, hey, this is part of the experience of being a human. Maybe I do feel relief that this person that I love so much died, right? And maybe that doesn't make me a terrible person. Maybe that doesn't take away any of the love I have and had for this person. Maybe it's just complicated to be a human, and maybe it's okay to feel weird thoughts. It doesn't mean I'm gonna, I can feel that moment of relief and understand that there's a part of me that is relieved and have tremendous sadness and live that fully, and it's not a contradiction, right? The existence of one thing does not negate the other. And I think oftentimes we do believe, or we have a fear in ourselves that if one exists, the other isn't true, or it overshadows the other. I cannot have a bad thought about this situation and still be a good person. I cannot be relieved this person died and still feel grief for their death, right? That seems like it's contradicting itself. It's not. It's either one or the other. So if I feel relief, I am not grieving, which means I didn't love them, which means I am a terrible, whatever the chain is that our thoughts fall into. But the truth is, we're almost always in some inner conflict, in some conflicting thoughts. Mm-hmm. If not in our thoughts, then in our emotions. If not in our emotions, then in some of our actions, and mostly in all three. And seeing all of it and having empathy for all of it, and then negotiating, dealing with it, right? Coming back to this idea of that the self as a village of characters, right? Where you're in a room of different conflicting things and you talk to all of them and you understand them and then you lead them down a path, versus being ashamed for part of your village or for part of people in the village and blaming them and fighting with them and creating conflict and all that. It's a tall order. That's a big task that it's a tricky place to get to or to travel to, but so rewarding. And the greatest artists that we've known, in one way or another, are people that have been able to go to the brightest and darkest spot of the human soul and to express that more boldly and more beautifully than we're able to.
It's typically not a happy-go-lucky Oblonsky.
Yeah. It's not all of life. But I think that art, one of the beautiful things of art is that it can talk about these things and infuse them with beauty. Mm-hmm. Even the darkest side of somebody, if you describe it artfully enough, honestly enough, creatively enough, you've now made something really despicable part of it because it's life. Yeah. It is beautiful. And it's something that when you take art away from us to express those parts of life and living, it's very hard to infuse these situations with beauty. Yeah. If I just describe, here's a person and he did the selfish thing and here's his actions. Yeah. If I just rationally go through what he did, there's no beauty in there. There's very little humanity in there. But if I tell the story the way that great artists are able to tell, it doesn't matter if it's music, if it's writing in a poem or a painting, great art is able to infuse all of life, even the most shadowy, the darkest spots, infuse them with beauty because they are part of life and all of life is beautiful. And so there's something more true in art in that way than we're able to find in, you know, in I don't know what to call, like non-art, I don't know, science. It's not that, but
it's like in fiction, there's more truth than in non-fiction. Almost, right?
There is. Like you could write philosophy books and psychology books, and find a lot less truth in them than reading a great novel.
A legal breakdown of a case.
Yeah.
You have all the data and the, at 7:15, Stepan went to. You have all that.
Yeah, it's like looking at life at source quote level, right? Now, you might have a great time playing World of Warcraft as a video game, but if I sit you in front of the pure source code, even if that's really what happens and how this game works, there's no joy or beauty in that, right? You'll sit there and you don't understand anything, or even if you did know programming, it might be interesting, but there's no joy and beauty, versus when you get to play the game. And many times in philosophy, in science, in psychology, in sociology, when we in history, when we describe just the mere fact and the things, and this happened, this, and this is how people are, and this, the brain functions this way, and that's why we sometimes feel these things when we do these things, and that, and that, and that. It's the source code, right? We're trying to get to the source code of life to understand exactly what line of code is producing what kind of response and result, and how do we explain everything. But the art turns it or reflects back real life to us back in a way that doesn't lose its beauty and its mystery and its magic. Like it's so hard. Like I still read nonfiction books, but the difference is so. Even nonfiction books that are really well, like when they're really well written and there's some interesting stories in them, I still enjoy them. But there's no comparison. The way, like I've read hundreds of books about psychology, right? Hundreds and hundreds of books. I definitely have a PhD in psychology in terms of just number of books I read about fucking the mind and all the different, like I've read a lot about this topic. This topic has interested me for 20 years now. None of these books, I've had a lot of aha moments. Oh, wow, this is amazing. But nothing compared to like reading a book like Anna Karenina, where there's such, on every page, such richness of life and human struggle and motivation, and that there's so much reflection that I have to go through, and so many insightful moments and so much pleasure and joy. Like to me, these great books they're telling us, or they're showing us the truth of who we are and why we are the way we are in so much more beautiful ways and true ways in some ways. So I'm getting so much out of all these books.
I find like these nonfiction books, they often give you like a framework that gives you a simplified way of thinking about something or looking at something, right? That can be very useful. But then you read something like this and it's like, wow, this was nice, but it's not that simple.
Yeah. All right, I got to run.